I love that you got the whole homebrew setup in the background there.
Oh yeah, if I basically built the entire studio just to have a background for Zoom calls.
Did you really though? I'd believe you because I think you incorporate them quite a bit in your videos, right?
Yeah.
No, yeah, he doesn't use that stuff. Like he just has it back there.
Yeah,
for
it's just
fun.
for decoration. Just to give you a little background, because I guess we've seen your videos before, so we kind of have an idea of who you are. So I'm born and raised in Canada, and I'm in Hamilton, which is kind of like just outside of Toronto, and
Right.
but from Montreal, Quebec, so kind of like Eastern Canada. And then Alessandro is originally from Italy. And you moved to the U.S.
At this point is like 7 years ago. Yeah.
7 years ago.
So
Okay.
yeah, I've moved here to Florida. I live in near Tampa. I know you guys came here like some time ago. You did like some episodes, if I'm not mistaken, around Clearwater, and so you might be familiar a little bit with the area.
2018 we came to Clearwater. Yeah.
Yeah, I moved in here in 2015, at the end of 2015, and so I've been living here. That's why I was kind of like joking a little bit about the Florida winter here, because it's as cold as it gets here.
Yeah, there is no such thing as winter in Florida, I'd imagine.
There's one day. One day we get one day where it really gets like, it gets under zero. Like it's one day. It's fine. It's manageable.
We started during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We used to, we met traveling in Ireland. We were having like a pint of Guinness in a pub, and we started chatting. And we've just been friends ever since. I was like over 10 years ago. So we've kept in touch, and we're always traveling to visit each other. And so during the pandemic, we're both huge beer fans, obviously. And we started having like these Zoom calls where we would just bring beers that we really liked to like present to the other person and just sort of talk about them and why we like them and have a beer together. And that's what sort of started us doing this channel for fun, where it's like, hey, why don't we just try and put this on video and just us sort of gushing about these beers that we love and see what happens. And then so that started the whole background of how we started doing this. But we've always been in different places. We've always been doing this kind of remotely like this from two different countries.
I love that kind of origin story. It's much more organic, I think, than most YouTube channels these days, which is like, I wanted to be famous. It's not panning out. So yeah, it's nice you've turned that into a really cool hobby or job. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. You're funded by.
No, it's really a hobby for us at this point. Yeah, it's something we do for fun, and we have enough people that comment regularly that make it fun for us and kind of like are invested and sort of like a little community, which kind of keeps it interesting and keeps us going. But it's really just a hobby. It's really allowed us to meet so many interesting people. Like we've gone to talk to like people from Guinness, from Schlenkerla in Bamberg. We got to talk to Matthias from there. So many interesting people we've gotten to meet and talk to over the years from doing this. That's why we do it. It's the fun of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I watched some of the Schlenker. It was really interesting. It's one place I've never been, and we really need to. So I watched that with great interest, particularly just knowing that he's good on camera as well. Because sometimes you go to film at a world famous brewery,
he's so good,
and they're like,
"Yeah."
So then I brewed, this saison. Oh my god! Okay. Yeah.
Well, welcome back to Beer Bracket Sessions, everybody. This is a series where we get to talk to really interesting people over a beer. And today we have Jonny from the Craft Beer Channel. Jonny, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor to have you here and have a beer with you too.
Not at all. Thank you so much for the invite.
So we'll let you get started since you're the guest. I don't want you to wait too long. We've already chatted a little bit before the episode started here. We've been sans beer for way too long. You said you brought two interesting ones. So what's the first one you want to open today?
Yeah, well, so you said that you were the videos that we'd done that you liked the most were our cask videos.
Yes.
So I thought about bringing along a bitter or something like that. But then I decided actually I'd bring a mild because it's got a more interesting story.
Yeah.
It's significantly sort of less well known, I think, but equally it's getting kind of trendy, like in parts of the States and in parts of the UK. So I thought I'd grab one. There's at this point that I wish I'd got it out of the fridge already. So give me 1 second. I got it. So I have a giant chest freezer full of about 100 beers and multiple homebrew kegs.
Wow.
And it fallen to the bottom. So you can edit this out, but yes.
We'll keep the beer search.
Exactly.
I'll be drinking it's a double dark mild from Boxcar, who were a brewery in East London in Bethnal Green, but literally last week got kicked out of their premises. Ooh, so I thought it might be also nice to give them a shout out and say, go buy Boxcar beer because they're in a bit of trouble. But yes, it's a 6.3% 6.3% mild, softer and smoother than a stout. This is an amped up interpretation of our dark mild. And Boxcar make like hazy IPAs mostly. And then they came out with a mild, not for a joke, but like just because they love mild and thought it'd be fun to release. And then everyone went wild for it.
Yeah.
So now they're a hazy IPA and mild brewer.
Nice.
That's nice.
That's awesome.
Good choice. We're excited to hear your impression on it.
So, Alessandro, what are you starting with?
So what I brought here is from a local brewery that I don't think Jonny might have had the chance to visit while he was here last time, because I think they opened a little bit after. It's called Barriehaus, a brewery here in Tampa. Joe and I visited recently when he was here down in Tampa here right last year. And this is their 3rd anniversary. It's called like Maltica, and it's a Baltic porter that has been aged in 3 different casks: Elijah Craig Bourbon Barrel, a Small Batch Reserve Cherry Brandy, and Dark Door Spirits Rum Barrel. And it says also 1% love, because 33, 33, 33. And there you go. So it's their 3rd anniversary. It's the 3rd time they make it. And I've never had it. So I thought, like, what better opportunity than here with all of you here on the channel.
That brewery is amazing, Jonny. They kind of have this slogan like "Bring back the lager."
Yeah,
and
focus on that.
They make amazing lagers, but they use the Luker taps, so those side pull taps.
Yeah, the Czech
to pour the lagers. Yeah, the Czech taps, and so
logo.
It gives the beer like this amazing sort of foamy, smooth, creamy body to it too. And they pour it from the tap. And having a lager like that in that form is just mind blowing.
Yeah, I mean, that Luca seemed to have had a moment of really spreading all over the States. Like, I'm not quite sure who. Maybe it was Notch, who I know have been doing it for a long time. But it's great to see that spread. And it's a little bit in the UK, but still, I mean, we won't get into the problem with pubs in the UK, but they're all struggling at the moment. And probably like
are they really?
£50 Luca tap is not forefront of their mind.
Yeah.
That's actually a really interesting topic. Maybe we can touch on that before the end of. But I'd really like to hear about that a little bit more. Alessandro and I are the same in that we both really have sort of like a fascination for the UK pub culture, especially.
For sure.
So maybe we'll touch on that. But first, because we got to get started on these beers. I don't know if you've heard of this brewery, Jonny. They're pretty well known. I think they export internationally. I know they do to the US. I'm not sure if they do to the UK and Europe, but it's a brewery called Unibroue. And from my home province of Quebec in Canada, I think they're most well known for their Fins du Monde beer that they produce, their triple. So they have a series of beers called Autre Chose, which in French just basically means other things. And so they recently brewed a Pilsner called the Bohémienne Pilsner, in French, the Pilsner Bohémienne. And it's very spicy. It's very aromatic and floral for a Pilsner, and it's very unique. And I really wanted to feature it on the channel. So let's pour out these beers and let's get started, because we have lots of questions that we want to pick your brain about here.
Well, I was worried 6.3 would be a silly ABV, but somebody's outdone me there, so I've fallen in the middle. That's good.
Yeah, you can see for a Pilsner, it's kind of
oh wow,
the coloration, that sort of like orangey, dark amber coloration that you get on. It's very unique. Oh wow! Well, cheers, guys!
Cheers!
Thanks so much, Jonny, for joining us. So good to have you.
Cheers! Yeah, thanks for having me.
So the first question that we always ask guests that come on to have a beer with us, it just so happens that everybody that we've talked to has a YouTube channel. So we talked with our friend Stefan, who runs a channel called the French Cooking Academy, and we talked to him about his life sort of running the channel. Then we talked to somebody called the Guinness Guru, who has a channel where he goes around tasting Guinness around Ireland, and got to talk to him about his sort of experience running a channel. So the first question we always like to ask is, and it's just our fascination because we run a channel too, what is kind of like a day in the life like for you right now? Is this sort of what you do full time? And if it is, how do you organize yourself? What's your day like?
The craft beer channel's been my full-time job since 2018. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, coming up on 5 years. Despite our size, I still have to supplement it with some extra bits. So I write books, do sort of consultancy, digital branding consultancy with breweries and pubs and different sort of drinks industry companies. But yeah, otherwise it's day in, day out editing. So we release a video a week and a podcast a week. So the days are either sort of on location shooting. So we try to get out and about for at least half of our videos. And the other half are here where I'm filming now.
Here in the studio.
Yeah, which is where I also edit everything as well. So most days it's in here on my own with my co-host Brad calling me on WhatsApp occasionally to tell me bad edits I've done. and recording podcasts from here as well. So like I built this with my bare hands against better judgment. And now it's where I basically live.
And so you do podcasts as well? I didn't know. Is there kind of like a craft beer channel podcast, or is it called something different?
So it's called The Bubble. Started off as a long form interview podcast where we were trying to, it's a bit of a torture concept, but essentially we were bored of hearing the same stories from the same people in the industry. But we also knew that that's what people wanted to hear. So what we decided to do is interview people from the craft beer industry, but not interview them about beer. Like Evan O'Riordan, who founded the Colonel, which is one of the OG craft breweries in the UK. He used to be a cheesemonger. So we interviewed him about cheese and sort of just did these little weird angles on it. Turns out Biggies didn't want to talk about cheese. They wanted to talk about beer. So that concept sort of died away. And so now we introduced a concept over lockdown, actually, called the Friday 5 p.m, where Brad and I, we were sick of like not going out. We were sick of not seeing our friends. Both of us had fairly recently gone freelance, so we'd stopped having like that Friday drink with colleagues at the office. So we founded this podcast for us so that we'd have a beer and chat about the week and chat absolute nonsense with some beer stuff, but some lifestyle stuff as well, and release it at 5 p.m. so that other people, particularly people who work from home or maybe they're commuting home, could try and get that Friday 5 p.m. kind of feeling as well. And that worked really well, like much better than the long form podcast. So that's now what we do. So every Friday at 5 p.m. we release a podcast that's sort of first beer of the weekend kind of vibe.
I have so many questions about this, and I could splinter off in a million different directions, but I know we kind of have a plan that we want to stick to question-wise. But before we go on, because I'm so curious about beer culture and beer fans and how they interact on social media, on YouTube, with creators. Do you find that the demand has been there podcast-wise for people to consume beer content in that form? Do you find like the passion is there?
I think there's definitely a demand there. There's definitely an audience there. The problem we have is that, so craft beer is a very middle-aged white guy pastime. Most podcasts are made by middle-aged white guys, which means that most people who like beer probably have a podcast. So basically there's too many podcasts out there, and cutting through the noise is really tricky because there's some really great podcasts that get almost no listens and some really quite average ones that get a lot of listens. I mean, you look at so Good Beer Hunting, who I did quite a bit of work for, or at least did until the craft beer channel got really busy. Like their podcast is top 1% in the world. It gets, I think, 2 or 3 million listens a year, and it's an amazing podcast. So we know that the demand is there. It's just very hard, particularly as a new podcast, to kind of cut through that. And that's what we found, even, with our YouTube audience that we already had, like dragging them across to podcasting was quite hard. And what we found that really worked was much shorter podcasts. So the Friday 5 p.m. is generally about half an hour long. So it fits into a commute, or you could even, after dinner on a Friday, once the kids are in bed, be a bit like, I'm just going to take half an hour. Is that all right? It's not like a 3-hour epic, like a lot of beer podcasts. And then also we talk about the channel all the time on there. So it's, you get behind the scenes stories of, what really happened on shoots that look a little bit chaotic.
One thing that we were a little curious about, because of the fact that you obviously clearly have like a long history of and knowledge on beer, both on with your channel and now we found out like about this podcast. How did your love for beer started? Can you tell us a little bit about your personal journey, like that brought you to the craft beer channel ultimately?
So my dad drinks terrible beer. So
tell us, what does he drink? What does he drink?
So he drinks what my family we lovingly refer to it as French piss. So it's what you can get in English supermarkets. It comes in little stubby bottles. The most famous brand is called Bière d'Or, but if they couldn't get hold of that, it was Bière Especial, which was worse.
Especial.
And so I grew up thinking that lager was terrible. Mm-hmm. So when I started drinking in my teens, and also still thought that lager was pretty terrible, I started drinking Guinness. I started drinking cask ale. I worked in a pub throughout my time at university and enjoyed drinking the cask ale there. So I was always sort of an ale drinker, which isn't that common really among young people in the UK. And it was just something I enjoyed doing. It wasn't something I really geeked out about. But I started just watching the odd review on YouTube, and joyously enough, a brewery opened around the corner from me when I was about 22, 23, called Camden Town Brewery, which is now owned by AB InBev, one of the biggest breweries in the UK. But they opened, they made delicious lager, so I started falling in love with lager. There was a great craft beer bar opened up really near me, and I tasted Red Hook IPA, which is a super mainstream mediocre IPA from the West Coast. I'm not even sure it's made anymore. Slowly fell in love with beer and watching the Beer Geek Nation, Chris Deltz, I want to say. Real Ale Guide, shout out to Martin. God, brain. Simon Martin, the Welsh guy. And then I met Brad when I was working for the chef, Jamie Oliver.
Oh, wow.
So we both worked in his creative team. And when Jamie started his YouTube channel, he brought all the equipment, installed a kitchen studio in our office. Me and Brad were just like, let's start a beer channel.
We're going to use this.
Yeah. So yeah, we used all of his equipment and stuff, and that's sort of where it started. So we just did it, as a hobby, as something fun because we had the equipment and we're messing around. And Jamie liked a couple of the videos, so we put it on his YouTube channel, and suddenly we were like, oh shit, we've got 5,000 subscribers. We should probably take this a bit more seriously.
I think the good content, like you were kind of saying before, I think that's how it starts usually, right? There's always a common thread of people who are doing it for fun as a hobby. Because when you're doing it for fun, I think you're producing content that you want to watch.
Yeah.
That you would, that's interesting to you. You're not producing something just for, because you think it's going to be profitable. Because for the audience, because you think it's going to be what's the most consumed and what's going to get the most clicks. You're making something that you think is interesting, that you want to film, that because there is no money behind it at first. There's no monetary motivation. And that's the same thing with us. It was just this fun experiment where, let's just do this because we love beer, and let's do something fun, and let's make stuff that we would get a kick out of watching. Yeah, I think that's where all the good stuff starts with. Not putting us in that category, but I think any good content that's out there, like maybe the best stuff. I mean, there's always that common thread at the beginning.
It was an interesting moment when I took it full time. So I went full time before Brad did, and it was an interesting moment to sort of sit down at my desk that first time. I still remember it, and be like, right, I've got to make money from this now. So I was like, right, well, do I change the content that I'm making? Do I, go to sponsors that I'd never have considered before? Mm-hmm. And it was exactly that kind of thing that you just mentioned. It was like, well, I've been making stuff that I've wanted to make for 5 years, and that's been working. So I should try and continue that. It's not always possible. Sometimes, we had to grow. We've made some videos that we're still very proud of, but probably was stuff that we knew would get certain interaction or would sponsored by a brand, and we wouldn't have done it if there wasn't budget there. But
I think that's just the nature of the algorithm, right? I mean, you have to at a certain point, and like not completely, but I think every once in a while you kind of need to throw in something to keep engagement high, or else you just sort of fall out of favor on the algorithms, and then even people who watch your videos.
It's not even just the algorithm. It's just, you're going to get a churn of viewers anyway. Like a lot of certainly in our so we have a Patreon that helps fund what we do. If you join the Patreon, you join our Discord forum. And in the Discord forum, there's people that know more about beer than me, and probably at some point they will get sick of knowing more about beer than me. And they'll go off and they'll find other ways to sort of fill their time. So you need new people coming in the whole time. So we make sure that there's always content that's going on there that is introductory, and so we recently started doing blind taste tests, which have proved insanely popular, more popular than we ever thought they would be. I did one tasting like bad macro lagers from Europe, and it's at about 600,000 views. It's the biggest thing we've ever done. Wow. And that's generated about 10,000 subscribers, just that video, all of whom didn't know us, might not have known craft beer, just went like, oh, I disagree strongly or really strongly agree with you on that, and so I'm going to give you a sub. And they've sort of fallen into our net, so to speak.
That's so interesting. I could talk to you for hours about that. But,
well, let's do it. I'm sure everybody wants to hear about the business of running a YouTube channel. I mean,
I know, right?
If there's one great way to make money on YouTube, it's to do a YouTube channel about running a YouTube channel, because those guys and girls make so much money.
They do so well.
It's insane.
They do so well.
Yeah.
There's this one channel that pops up in my feed all the time, and this guy exactly that strategies on how to make the best videos that get, the most viewership and like how to grow your channel. And this guy's getting tens of millions of views, and it's just like all he's doing is offering up like a couple of strategies. I've sent you a couple of links to his videos before. It's like interesting for you. That's an industry in itself. That's so fascinating. But anyways, yeah. So moving this along, because there's so many things that we wanted to pick your brain about, and one that I was really fascinated about, and this is a bit of I guess a complex topic, and there's a lot of ins and outs to it.
Yeah, we're done with the easy questions.
I'm really curious to see what you think.
There you go.
Yeah. Oh, please do.
It's only 6%. So, put a little more.
Yeah. By the way, this is so good. I've never had a Pilsner like this before, where it's so floral and it's so malty and flavorful. It's delicious.
Is it Old World hops? Is it Saaz?
Saaz is one of them. There are 3 hops. Here, I have the list. Saaz is one of them. Saaz, Laurel, and Hersbrucker.
So yeah, Laurel is a modern lagery hop, but you can stick it in an IPA. A lot of people do.
It's a fascinating beer. I love this one. So I told you when I first contacted you to ask if you wanted to do this, I told you that I really loved your series on cask ales. And 1 or 2 of those episodes, I think it was sort of like the whole thing was in association with Fuller's Brewery. Am I wrong on that? But there were 1 or 2 at least where you focused on their vintage ale, which I have a bottle of back here. I love their vintage ale is fantastic. I love them. So we've seen a lot of the beer community is kind of like very fickle, and we deal a lot with macro beers. We deal a lot with big brands. And you, of course, being the craft beer channel, of course, craft beer is the focus. Fuller's, how is Fuller's considered in the UK? Because I can get their beers here. Are they considered a macro brewery in the UK? And if so, did you get any kind of, I know this might sound like a silly question to some people, but did you get any kind of like pushback from your viewers talking about a Fuller's beer? Because I find some people are very sort of like gatekeeper-ish about that, where it's, if you're going to be talking about craft beers, do not talk about these bigger producers.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say on that. So I guess the first thing to say is that macro has a different kind of context in the UK, because so our biggest independent brewery, which nowadays is, God, who would it be? Well, I guess Brewdog, but we're not going to go down that horrendous.
Is Brewdog Scottish originally?
Yes, yeah. Sorry, British brewery, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, so the biggest independent brewery will be smaller than. It wouldn't even be in the top 500 breweries for the US.
Yeah.
The size of the UK, but there's just not that much market there. So when we talk about macro in the UK, it's always a little bit silly because the biggest ones, not even 100,000 barrels.
Yeah.
So within that, I mean, Fuller's are, I think, about 200,000 hex, so 250,000 barrels or something like that. So purely on size alone, you probably wouldn't call them a macro brewery, but they are now owned by Asahi, who are very much a macro brewery.
Yeah.
So when they were sold, which was, a huge scandal in the UK because Fuller's is one of the oldest breweries, most historic, and indeed one of the most loved sort of cask ale brands in the UK, and have been in the Fuller Smith and Turner family since it was founded in 1840-ish. That was a big scandal in the UK, and a lot of people, said they'd never drink Fuller's again, and rightly or wrongly, that's what they decided. If you'd have asked me that question 5 years ago, I'd have said I'm never going to drink Fuller's again. But probably in the last 3 years, some would say the craft beer channel's approach has softened on that. I'd say it's actually got more hardline, because what we've done, what we've decided, because of some things I can get into in a sec, is we don't care about independence. Independence is a means to an end. Just because you're independent doesn't mean you're a good company, a good person, a good brewery. You should use your independence to do the right thing in the world. So, we know from like Brianne Allen's work with the Me Too movement in beer that there are a lot of very, very horrible people that own, run, brew, do sales for small independent breweries. So just drinking independent isn't good enough. You've got to drink ethically. So we changed our focus to be not on independence, but on ethics. So at the Craft Beer Channel, we have a thing called the Blacklist, where we just constantly monitor the news, constantly monitor social media. And when we hear about stories of breweries acting unethically, we get as good a verification of that as we possibly can, and we put them on the blacklist. You can be on the black, you can be on the grey list. The grey list is where we will accept. We might cover the brewery if it's, you know, something really iconic, you know, like AB InBev. We might cover Bourbon County Stout because, you know, that essentially started a whole movement of barrel aged beer.
Yeah.
We're not going to be talking about Budweiser, Bud Light anytime soon, except in my blind taste test in which I slagged it off. The grey list makes up a lot of breweries, you know, and a lot of breweries that people know and love and respect and are large. But yeah, that's the rules we put in place. Blacklisted breweries, Founders, Heineken will never feature on the craft beer channel ever again. And then everybody else, I guess they're white breweries, but they're not on a list because that list will be huge. You know, we sort of still work with, and that includes Asahi. Asahi have, to our knowledge, never done anything that could be considered controversial. So them and the brands that they own are, which includes Pilsner Urquell, which is one of my favorite beers in the world. Happily, it's great, but you know, there's breweries I've had to let go because they're, you know, they're owned by Heineken or whomever. Heineken, goddamn Heineken, found out this week. So Guinness pulled out of Russia after Russia invaded Ukraine in solidarity with the Ukrainians. Heineken
moved in with Island's Edge?
Yeah. Invented a beer. And they called it Black Sheep, as if they know what they're bloody doing.
But they had Island's Edge already,
Nitro
right?
Stout and just introduced it to Russia. So now they own the Russian Nitro Stout sector. They are a horrific company.
Wait, is Island's Edge still a thing, or was that just in Ireland?
I think it's still a thing, but I think it's just in Ireland.
Okay. Yeah, because that was dirty how they did that too. Thinking like they were going to tear away some of that Guinness market and just created like basically what they thought would be like the closest thing to a clone to Guinness, but it was just completely rejected by the market in such a vicious way. People hate it there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bold person that goes over to Ireland with any kind of alternative to, well, Guinness, Beamish, or Murphy's, you know. If it's not one of those three, it's probably not worth the effort, is it? And I love that it's a joke in Ireland now. I love that.
We could keep probably expanding on this topic alone, like for hours. We might come back to this question, but can you tell us a little bit of, you know, when you obviously with the channel, I'm sure you do a lot of research and you pick beers like based on some content you might be producing, but off the channel, off the podcast, what are some of your go-to beers? Some that, you know, you keep around that you just say like, oh, really looking forward to. You mentioned like Pilsner or Quell, but like anything else that you can is worth mentioning?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the beer that I drink the most of is a beer called Lucky Saint, which is a low alcohol German brewed Helles. Okay. Simply because it is, in my opinion, the best low alcohol lager I know of. And yeah, I get through a case of it a month because working in my job, it's very, very hard to take days off. Particularly you know, it's very often like I'll have had a heavy week and it'll get to the weekend and I'm like, I really don't want to have a beer. My wife is like, you only drink with other people. So you're having a beer. So that's when I bring out the low alcohol lagers. That seems to that gets me a pass. So yeah, I mean that takes up a lot of fridge space. But otherwise, I mean, there's a couple of beers that I always come back to. You know, if I'm out drinking and Pilsner Urquell's on, that's always going to be drunk. Mm-hmm. Probably my favorite, not necessarily specific beer, but I drink a huge amount of Verdant Brewing. They're a sponsor of ours, disclaimer, but nice. They make the best IPAs I think in Europe and make some really stunning pale ales as well. So I drink a lot of their beers because if I'm not drinking lager, I'm probably drinking IPA, West Coast or hazy. You know, those are my two favorite styles. So yeah, and then there's another brewery called Donzoko who just make fabulous lagers up in Edinburgh, and they have a beer called Big Foam, which is a 5.2%. They call it a rustic lager. It's a lager with spelt. And it's
nice.
Grainy and hoppy and lemony.
That sounds good.
I drink a ton of that.
I love Edinburgh. What a beautiful city. Bit of a tangent, but one of my favorite places.
I mean, it's a stunning place and increasingly has amazing beer. Yeah. So one of the original people at Colonel Brewing, another incredible brewery, but their beer's a little bit hard to get hold of where I live. One of the original employees there moved up to Edinburgh and founded a brewery called New Barns, who, I mean, just look them up. Like their branding is hilarious and brilliant. Like almost trolling like the beer scene, you know. There's no IPAs. There's
I love that.
extra
I love
ales,
that tongue in cheek.
super dry lagers, table
Yeah.
beers, but it's just all
Table
beautifully
beers,
clean
nice.
and brilliantly brewed. They released an imperial style just called plain dark beer, and then they ended up doing a collaboration with Omnipollo, who have never made a plain dark beer in their lives, and they called it complicated dark beer.
That's my kind of humor. I love it already.
Yeah, exactly. That's totally our type of humor. I love that.
Joyous edition.
Yeah, some of our favorite beers that we've tried. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Innocent Gun Brewery. I don't know what your opinions are on them, but we can get some of their exports here, and I love their stuff. I find at least here in North America, they provide some really original, different beers like that are easily accessible in grocery stores or corner stores that I really do appreciate. And the Harveston Brewery, I don't know if you've heard of them out of Edinburgh. They make a beer they export to Canada and the US called Ola Do that we've had a couple of times. And it's basically an aged stout, like a barrel aged stout. That's fantastic. I love they're aged in Highland Park casks. And yeah, fantastic beers come out of Edinburgh. Such a great city for a beer scene.
Yeah, and how for long, like both of those breweries are, you know, pretty old in the scene, really. And I think Innocent Gun have an interesting reputation. Like when they came out.
Oh, do they? Are they on your blacklist?
No. There's I don't think there's any ethical issues. It's more it's weird because back when they were making their oak aged beers, everyone was like, oh well, it's not real barrel aging because they just
okay. It's the barrel in the beer, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing that they do.
With
but
the
it's
chips,
just like
wood chips.
Yeah, at the time I was like, yeah, I guess it's not really barrel aging, but like, I mean, you look at the shit that brewers throw into their beer these days. And everyone's like, yeah, give me that 40 grams per litre of cherry puree.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fine. But Innocent Gun don't get a pass for using oak spirals instead of barrels. You know, it's an odd one. And Innocent Gun, I think, in the craft beer industry have never quite repaired that relationship with beer geeks.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the States, it's well loved. It's interesting what breweries do make it big in the States because it's Innocent Gun, it's Fuller's, it's oh my god, what's the
Samuel Smith?
Simon Smith, that's the one I was struggling for.
Yeah.
He's a horrendous human being, the guy that owns that. He's on the blacklist.
I've never had any of their beers.
But a lot of the beers are very popular in the States. Over here, no one drinks them. You know, it's you go to a Simon Smith pub because it's half the price of every other pub in London. You know, that's the only reason you drink it.
So, okay, that's a good transition because I had a question that I wanted to ask you about cask ales, but I think this is going to morph into something else. Because you had mentioned that the pub scene in the UK is not doing so well, and I'm fascinated by this because that series that you did on cask ales, it blows my mind that people aren't supporting it more, that people aren't more fascinated by this, or don't want to flock to pubs that offer really good cask ales to get that whole experience. And I think we're nerds for beer history and care and love that's put into the preparation, the serving of beer and the presentation of it. And that all just goes hand in hand with it. So I guess my question is, I'm curious about cask ales, but I'm also curious about the pub industry in general. And you mentioned Sam Smith pubs. And so franchise pubs are a thing are so popular in the UK that don't really exist here. I mean, you get franchise restaurants in North America that are kind of like bars, but you don't get the franchise pub so much. Mm-hmm. So do you think the franchising of them in that sense has something to do with it? Do you think the culture with the younger generation just isn't skewing towards going out to the pub? Do you think the interest in beer is weaning? Like, what do you think is the cause of that?
I mean, there's so many. I could do a whole series on what's wrong with the British pub.
I'm sure you could. We could do a whole 2-hour talk about that. I'm sure.
The main issue right now is Brexit, cost of living, and well, no, that's it. It's Brexit and the cost of living. So pubs are really struggling to find good staff. There's huge staff turnover. Mm. Like literally, there's a pub in my hometown where I'd say probably 2 or 3 days of the week they can't open because they don't have enough staff. You know, so there's a real staffing crisis. And then we have the cost of living crisis, which means A, people aren't going out as much, they're not spending as much, they're not drinking as much. But B, that cost of living stretches to the pub. So they're paying insane energy rates right now. Like 6 or 7 times what they were 18 months ago, which is really hurting their margins.
That's insane.
And then you've got the breweries are having exactly the same thing. So they're all putting their pricing up. So Black Sheep Brewery, not related to the Heineken skullduggery, they recently put their prices up by something like 13% overnight. Just like, these are the energy prices, this is what we've got to do to survive. And so they're paying more for their beer and selling less of it. At the same time, supermarkets, not small indie box shops because they're seeing price rises too, but supermarkets that are buying cheap macro beer are not seeing that so much. So everybody's buying from supermarkets, so they're staying home. You've then got the fact that one in 3 people in the UK under 25 are teetotal. So you're not getting if they are going to the pubs, they're not spending as much. And then you've got the pub tie, which is a system that is illegal in pretty much every country in the world except for the UK.
What is it? I haven't heard of this.
So the beer tie is essentially if you own a pub, you can restrict what beers are served there, which is pretty normal. If you own a pub, you get to choose what the beers are. The problem is in the UK, you have pub companies that own thousands and thousands of pubs. Like there's a company called Stonegate that is a Cayman Islands tax avoiding, they're in a tax haven. They own 1 in 10 British pubs. Wow. 1 in every 10 pubs you walk into is owned by Stonegate in the Cayman Islands.
And then Green King is another big one?
Green King own about 4,000 or 5,000 pubs. Wow. Marston's own a couple of thousand.
That's an insane number. 4 or 5.
They're essentially real estate companies. And they are massively restricting what's being bought. So they've done big deals with all of the big breweries. They'll serve their own beers over anybody else's.
Yeah, exactly.
And they will also, on the beers that they don't own or brew, they will charge extortionate rates. So a keg of Foster's, the worst possible lager you could really imagine, they'll charge a pub that they own 160 quid for a 50-litre keg. The free house down the road, where the landlord owns the pub, he could buy that for 70, 80 quid.
Wow.
So it's an entirely...
So they're just discouraging them from serving anything that isn't their beers.
Yeah. Or just making sure they make tons of cash off of the stuff that they're not making the bigger margin on.
How do you feel about the Green King beers? I can get their Abbott Ale here that I actually really enjoy, but I haven't tried any of their other beers.
They're solid, reliable cask ales,
okay.
They'd... Yeah. We have this incredible. We have about 2,000 cask breweries in the UK, and Green King are sort of near the bottom of that pile. But it's interesting because there's sort of an exoticism I think about British cask, like we have about like West Coast IPA or Belgian Lambic or Czech Pilsner.
There's totally an exoticism about it.
You guys have
we're wrapped up in.
Yeah. So if I go to pub and I'm like, Green King IPA, no, I'll have something else. Whereas I like beer writers who I love and respect, like Jeff Allworth, Beervana, like one of my favorite writers. Like he did a whole blog post about how much he loved Green King IPA, and all the British beer writers were like, "Really?" It's kind of like saying you love, I don't know, like Yingling or something. It's just like, well, fine, but what?
That exoticism thing is such a good point because, like, Alessandro and I personally, we've just been in North America, we've been so oversaturated by IPA for so long that for us, it's just like, the cask ale phenomenon is just fascinating to us because we love a good English ale, like a good bitter. It's just something so different than what we grew up with and something that we've been surrounded by our entire adult life. And even him and I feel the same way, where we just really love a good lager.
Yeah.
We love a good lager. And we've made a couple of episodes about that, like, and there's reasons for it, obviously, but why craft brewers aren't producing more lagers. And just because we love like a really carefully done lager that's done with love and care that just tastes delicious. We think, and we've done a couple of brewery tours and interviews where we've talked to people about that. And they all say the same thing. It's like a good lager is so amazing because there's nothing to hide behind. Whereas with an IPA, you can hide behind certain flavors, you can hide behind certain hops and certain aromas. But with a lager, it's like, if it's not good, it's obvious that it's not good. And if it's good,
but I mean, that's why people don't love lager. It's because a lot of the time it's not very good.
And you've
got to have sort of done that craft beer sort of circle journey to get to that point. Like everybody has an entry point, which might be Imperial Stouts or hazy IPA, or could be like a Belgian a Belgian lambic or something that just blows your mind, and you have to try all the other styles, and then you come back to lager, because even, the best lager in the world tastes, recognizably close to Budweiser. You can go, oh well, these are clearly the same style at least. So it's really hard to tell somebody like, just trade up 20% when they could have a marshmallow stout and go, what the is this?
True.
So, you have to sort of do that, Jay. I mean, I went exactly through it. I thought lager was crap until like 2 or 3 years into the channel, to be honest. And that's just, it's human nature to want, we're bored of lager, so why would you get excited about something quite close to the lagers you're bored of? It's like, you got to go the whole other way first.
It's a slight subtle difference, but it's such a difference.
Yeah, I mean, once you know it, once you recognize it, and once your palate's a bit tired of goddamn marshmallow stouts, you're like, this stuff is amazing.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know about you two, but I went through that beer pretty quickly, so I'm opening my second one.
Well, it's because yours was a lager. I'm drinking a 6.3% mild.
There you go.
I'm halfway through here.
Actually, okay, we've been so busy talking that I haven't heard about either of your 2 beers. I said a little bit about mine. But Jonny, tell us about yours a little bit.
Mine's delicious. I mean, I have got through it fairly quickly. So it's like raisins and figs and caramel. It's very sweet, mild. Like, it's a fascinating style. We did a video like what is mild, actually, with the single version of this. But mild wasn't really a style when it started out. It was just a word for saying this beer's fresh. It's not aged, and it's become like a dark beer in the UK. And it probably would have been this strong. People think mild is like a session beer. Originally, mild would have been 6 or 7%. But then in World War I, with rationing, all the ABVs got knocked down. So all the historical styles suddenly became session beers. And now we assume they were session beers at the start. They weren't. Bitter wasn't.
Yeah.
IPA wasn't. Like, the best-selling IPA in the UK is Green King IPA, which is 3.8%.
Wow.
So yeah, it's
3.8%.
Yeah. Green King IPA is 3.8%.
Wow.
Or 3.5 maybe in bottle.
Wow.
But yeah, so it's sweet and it's wholesome and it's hearty and it feels nourishing in a slightly dirty way.
I love that comment.
Slightly dirty way.
That's awesome.
And what about the Baltic water?
Yeah, what about that Barriehaus beer?
This is actually quite special. Like, it has like a very rich mouthfeel, like very, very rich. You get notes of chocolate, coffee, that you probably would expect at least. I like how like the malt character is multi-layered. So like you take a sip and it just keeps evolving, and you have all these different flavors and aromas coming up. Like you take a sip and this finish just stays with you for a long time. It's very drinkable. Like, I mean, it's 11%, but it doesn't feel like that at all, which is dangerous. I mean, I just poured a little bit out of it, but I'm starting to feel it. Like, it's it's definitely a good beer.
I
can't wait to go back to that brewery. They did, Jonny, they play with the Lucre taps a little bit, and it's funny. So they do something called a slow pour, where over the course of 10 minutes, they slowly pour. So I'm sure you're familiar with the Lucre taps or the side pours, right? So when you open the tap just slightly, you get mostly foam, right? And then the more that you open it, more actual beer comes out because it's less pressure. So what they do is they just start by cranking the tap a little bit, so it's just foam that comes out. They let it settle for like 2 minutes, and they pour a little bit more, let it settle. And the entire process takes about 10 minutes. And by the end of it, you have just like a lager with a really thick foamy head, and it's like creamy. It's almost like it's nitrogen infused. It's this really creamy lager. And Lucre, I remember they posted a video on their social media, on their Instagram, saying like, hey, we do this slow pour. And the official Lucre Instagram account responded, it's like, we don't back this slow pour. We don't approve of using our taps.
I know that Lucre.
It's like this wizardry. You can't do this. Yeah. They got so upset.
Yeah, I mean, their theory is that you don't need to do that to get that creamy head and that stability. But I mean,
I think it's a novelty.
Yeah, and it's crazy. You can build it out the top of the rim of the glass that way and stuff. It's silly and it's fun.
But it was so cool. Yeah. And then they have like the Milka pour, I think it was, where it's just all foam.
Yeah.
Milko, exactly, where it's all foam. Yeah. That was an amazing experience, trying that for the first time, because you're basically drinking foam, but it
changed. That's why you guys need to go to the Czech Republic, That's what it's
I know.
all about. It's one beer, 3 different pours. You just pick your poison. and it's great.
I love it.
It's definitely coming. But if you ever come back down here in the Tampa area, like the Barriehaus, and if you're a fan of lagers, like they really focus on that, like Joe mentioned at the beginning.
Well, it was supposed to be. So when we went there, we loved Clearwater and St. Pete so much that actually it was going to be my honeymoon when I got married in 2020.
Oh, really?
Nice.
And obviously that didn't happen for reasons.
Yeah.
So we went to Cornwall instead, which was fine. It was lovely.
Nice. There's an amazing beer scene in Clearwater, Tampa. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, it's it's really in that sense, like being beer fan, like I got lucky coming in and living here. Like there's always been like plenty of fun thing to explore, and the Barriehaus is relatively recent. Like they started in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, when we were talking with with the owner and brewer, and like he was saying like how they had just started and then the pandemic hit, like but they've managed like to go through and stick with their idea of bringing lagers back, like so that's all they focus on. They do offer obviously other options, but that's their main focus, which
their Vienna lager is amazing.
Yeah, it actually won the gold medal on the beer world competition like this year, like which was crazy, like, and yeah, it's a delicious beer, like it's.
But just their regular Tampa export lager.
Yeah, that's like, my favorite.
I've never tasted anything like that before. How we're just saying before how like the slight differences in a good lager to a bad lager. This had layers of flavor.
Yeah.
That I've never tasted. Maybe it's because it was fresh. I don't know what, or just with the Luger taps and just the consistency, the mouthfeel of it. But there were layers of flavor there that I've never tasted in a lager before. Yeah. I tasted the malts fresh. It was just unbelievable.
I mean, beer is. I've talked about this on the channel and the podcast quite a bit, but beer is. Do you know like marginal gain theory in cycling? You make
small gain.
Yeah, exactly. You make a cog half a gram lighter. You make the rider, their oxygen intake 0.1% greater, and you do that 100 times, and you end up with the 2% difference that wins races. That's what great brewing comes down to. And then sometimes, if you haven't had something that's close, because, you can go to most breweries in the UK, most breweries probably in the States, and get a nice hazy IPA, and you won't notice really the ones that are 2% better. But if you haven't had a style that's beautiful, like a Dortmund or something, you'll really notice those marginal gains, because it will be, 10% better than anything you've had before. And I think, it's why people get a bit jaded about IPAs and stuff like this, because everyone's so good at making them, but not everyone's so good at making Czech Pils, Dortmunders, Baltic Porters.
Yeah.
Because it can be really small differences within styles.
All right, before we wrap up, I was so excited about the second beer that I got, so I need to open this. This is from a brewery in Toronto, Ontario, Canada called Bellwoods Brewery. And they're pretty large here. I don't think they export outside of the province of Ontario here in Canada, but their beers are widely accessible here. They're an incredible, incredible craft brewery. And they make a lot of ales. So their most popular beer is called Jelly King. And they age the ales in different ways. And one of them is that they age it in Riesling wine barrels. And it adds like this beautiful aroma and taste of white grape to it that I've heard about this before. I know it exists, but I'd never tried it before. So for me, it was a revelation to try this really sour, funky ale that just had all these layers of character to it. But they basically made a Pilsner called the Bellweiser that I'm very curious to try, because their beers are all fantastic and so full of taste and character. So I'm really curious to see what their interpretation of a Pilsner is. And they have just amazing branding, like the packaging. I'm a nerd for this kind of stuff, but the labels is kind of like this laminate sort of like thick material that they use for the labeling on it, so it makes the can really kind of like nice to the touch. Little details like that.
It's all about the experience.
It's all about the experience. Exactly. Johnny, what was the second one that you got?
What about you?
Let's hope I can find it quicker this time. There we go. So this is a double IPA. Why not? It's Tuesday. Which
is right.
Full disclosure, is not that
Tuesday.
fresh, but I've been looking for, we all do this as beer geeks. Like, we get a special beer in and we look for an excuse, and then you start to go like, well, this isn't going to taste its best anymore. But this is actually from a video we did last year. We did with a brewery called Siren. We did it's called Time Hops, where we looked at the hop varieties that help build craft. So it was Simcoe, Cascade, Centennial.
Yeah.
Well, mainly Citra, but also Mosaic a little bit. And so we interviewed like the growers, the brewers about their experiences of growing the hops for the first time, trying the hops for the first time. And then Siren went away and brewed clones of those beers using the information that the brewers had given them. So this is essentially a Pliny the Elder clone. Brewed in the UK. So this is based on the Simcoe hop. So we told the story of Simcoe and then brewed this collaboration. So I'm interested to see how well it's held up, because one of the great things about Pliny the Elder, because it travels all over the world, because people keep muling it places, it holds up very well. So we'll see if it's the case with this as well. Siren are one of those breweries that I think everybody in the UK, they were founded in 2013. They're very well respected. They make lots of very exciting beer, but I think sometimes it gets lost just how good they are, and I'm not really sure why.
Yeah.
But they make some of the best IPAs, definitely some of the best barrel aged beers, and really work hard to sort of be part of the culture. So like doing projects like Time Hops with us. One of their beers they released in collaboration with what's the word? An astrologer, and like they launched it with like a stargazing night on YouTube and stuff. Like they do amazing stuff. That
an astronomer,
astronomer, that's the one. That just gets gets people involved and excited. It's all part of the experience.
That's so cool.
Not just sort of pumping out an IPA and going, it's Citra Mosaic. Sort of they get that drinkers want a bit more experience than that. So they're one of my favorites.
So what's your second beer, Alessandro?
So I went with a more, I wouldn't say like necessarily streamlined, but since it's so cold here in Florida this time of the year, it's the winter, you got to enjoy it and go with these cold. Like
in your 20 degree
exactly
cold weather.
So there's Schneider Weisse, like their Eisbock, Aventinus, one that I'm a big fan of. Like I usually always get it like around winter times, like even if it's not really winter here. But always find it like fascinating, like the way like those beers are produced, and researching it a little bit. It's funny that like this type of production is considered, it's a distillation here in the US, so it's actually legal. So that's something you can do at home, like just so if you forget your beers outside and they get frozen, like technically you're doing something illegal if you drink them after.
All right, so you got to ask him the traditional last question.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Sorry, I was going.
But we have to explain what it is first, because we made that mistake before. We didn't explain the concept.
So our channel is called like the beer brackets, and I don't know if you noticed the logo here behind me, but it's basically like two brackets, and then second one is a little slanted. But the idea is that the concept that we came up with is you don't just have a beer. You open and you close your beer brackets. You don't necessarily only have to have two. You can have more in the middle, but like the idea is that to make like an event out of it, create like a ceremony almost. So that's our little addition
to expand on it a little bit more. So what it was, like I said, we started sort of like doing these Zoom calls before we ever did a YouTube channel. And we started this in person. When I think it was in the trip when I came to visit you in Italy. I think it was the first time we did this. Mm-hmm. So it was more just like, because we're both so excited about beers. And it's like, we're going to have this great night out. We're going to hang out. We're going to go into the city in Rome and we're going to, party it up and have a bunch of beers. Then we got to start the night with the first drink.
Yep.
It's like, so we want to be special. So we want to have a special beer to start off the night. And we thought, at the end of the night, it's like, hey, let's, get back to the house. We're hanging out. It's about to go to sleep. So like, let's have a special beer to close out the night. Something that's good, not just a regular sessionable beer that we might have been drinking out during the day. There's like, it's like closing like your beer brackets of the night, the closing bracket to the evening. So the concept that's kind of taken its control over all our episodes, like we always say, opening and closing our beer brackets, the first and last beer that you're going to have. It's always, most of the time it's two. It's about sort of paying attention to, if you're going to be having beers with friends, paying attention to what you're choosing and making it special.
Exactly.
And maybe choosing one to be the first one of the evening and saying like, we're going to start with this one and I'm going to tell you about this one because of this reason. And sort of putting the attention on the beer and making it part of part of the moment.
Making it an experience more than just like having a beer, right? Like, so it gives it like a little bit more of a wider, concept to it. So that's the introduction. Like, what do you think about that? Like, what's your opinion?
Well, I mean, I love the idea of it. I used to go. I went through a big phase of finishing nights with special beers, but the problem with that is generally you don't necessarily remember.
That's a
or your palate's like shot by the end of the night too.
Well, that's why the second bracket is like slanted because
we've all been there. Yeah, I used to have a friend. He's still a friend. We haven't fallen out, but we lived together for a long time when we were just getting into beer, and we would be forever getting back from nights out, cracking a beer, drinking like 3 or 4 sips of it, and going, actually, I'm going to go to bed. So we had to
that's the danger of the closing bracket.
Yeah. We like in the end we made a rule where if you were going to have one final beer, you had it in the pub, because then it's much harder to walk away from a beer in a pub. You know?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good idea. These are all great tips for closing brackets.
Write it down. Like,
stay in the pub. Otherwise, love the concept. Just you gotta have the right method.
Jonny, I gotta take up too much of this. Was such a pleasure having you. I could talk to you for hours. Like all these topics that we touched on, it was very surface level, and I would love to dig deep and have longer conversations. There's a million more things we'd love to talk to you about. So you're more than welcome back anytime.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, always happy. If we can make the diaries work, then I'll chew your ear off about whatever topic you want to ask.
Awesome. Cheers. Thank you so much, Jonny.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thank you.